Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. As normal, my name is Jason Buffington from Veeam. You will notice that I got an upgrade this week in a new wing person. Joining me today, technologist from the product strategy team, Emilee Tellez. Welcome to the show. Not your first time, but I'm so glad to have you back.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I would say Dave is probably going to be sorely missed, but I'm happy to step in for this portion.
Nah, everyone knows what Dave thinks. This is an episode where I really want to hear from you. So for those that haven't had the chance to meet Emilee before, she's one of my most favoriteest humans, mostly because she loves Orchestrator almost as much as I do within the Veeam portfolio. But this week, that's not what we're going to talk about. This week, we're going to talk about the hybrid and multi-cloud landscapes that, as reported from the data protection trends research. So before we get into that, though, so I hail from the great state of Texas. Em, you are down in Arizona?
Arizona, yeah.
Very good. All right. So both of us south of the Mason-Dixon line, and neither one of us regretting what happens in winter. So, but let us know where you're from around the world. We're going to have the map up in just a few minutes, and would love to turn the world green. That is not an accident within the space. But before we do, Em, before you joined the office of the CTO, you spent a good amount of time on our front lines as a system engineer. So I love the real world that you bring into this. So what I'm hoping that we get a chance to do today is really kind of compare. Okay, so we've got 1,200 unbiased organizations, and for those that aren't familiar, we are in week 3 of unpacking the Data Protection Trends Report from 2024. And if we can kind of bring up the information on that report on our screen, this year 1,200 responses were surveyed from all enterprise organizations. So all organizations that had more than 1,000 employees. They came from the Americas, from EMEA, from APJ, all kinds of different organizations, at least enterprise or more. All the respondents were either the IT leader or the IT implementer responsible for data protection within their organizations. And you can see the bevy of topics that were covered on the left-hand side. And this week, I want to talk specifically about hybrid and multi-cloud. Now, first and foremost, I think a lot of folks interchange those two terms along the way. So let's first talk about hybrid and what that looks like. We're going to go ahead and bring up our first data point. Now, for those that have been watching the Data Protection Trends Report over the years, the chart on the right-hand side you're familiar with. Every year, the unbiased research firms go out and ask their survey respondents, what percentage of your servers are physical servers? And those are the bands that we see here over on the left. We see what percentage are virtual machines. Those are the bands through the middle. And what percentage of the machines or workloads are cloud hosted over on that right-hand side. Now, as we've talked about before, the 2020 data was pre-COVID. Right. And so we see there was a larger spike on physical and virtual. And as we all know, for many organizations, COVID-19 accelerated IT modernization, digital transformation, and cloud adoption strategies. And so you do see this hockey stick where the physical presence, physical and virtual within the data center, dropped a few points. But it seems like for the last several years, we're in a variance now. We're only getting 1 or 2% variance year over year in all 3 categories. And to kind of bring that home, let's talk about the status quo. Let's talk about this year's data. So 2024, we've pulled that out. That's the pie chart on the left-hand side, same data. But this year's data shows about 45%, about half and half, right? So about half the workloads just under are cloud hosted in the blue, 45%. The other just over half data center centric, and that's 55%. And that's even, by the way, even split, physical and virtual. And talk about what did you see when you saw this year's version of the data? And how does that match up with what are the conversations looking like in the conference room when all the servers are no longer on their raised floor?
Yeah. No, it's not surprising, right? You kind of see the big move from 2020 to 2021 where everybody had to do something because you no longer had access to your on-prem data center, right? So we had to do something, and maybe that forced people to be more cloud friendly or to accelerate their cloud adoption model, and bring it to the forefront very quickly. But I think what you kind of saw overall is that everybody, as they started to build their environment into either a hybrid cloud environment using a multi-cloud environment or whatever it may be, that they decided that, hey, maybe there's a better way that we could be doing this a little bit smarter. So that's when we start to see kind of that billowing of everything moving either back to on-prem or things that are just kind of, I would say, evening out over time. Ideally, what you're probably going to see is that number one, the data center is not going away.
Yep,
As
yep.
much as we all would have said, yep, everybody's going 100% cloud. I could tell you, I've sat in many conversations with many CIOs, many IT directors that said, yeah, we're going 100% cloud. We're not even worried about, looking at any hardware or, extending our warranties or anything like that. We're going all in on it. And after a few months, and once they started either a migration process or a testing, it suddenly became clear that, you know what, we could still be leveraging our on-prem data centers.
Sure.
There are still workloads that run better on-prem versus in the cloud. So to that point, right, I don't think anything's going away. I think it's just being smart about the type of technology that you're using for the workloads that you have.
I kind of think back to, it wasn't that many years ago when organizations were saying, hey, you know what? We're going to get rid of all of our physical servers. We're
Yep.
only going to go virtual. We're going to virtualize everything in the environment. That hadn't happened yet either, right? There are reasons why these workloads make sense on whatever platform they're currently on over time. Now, that being said, when we should also talk about when organizations are moving workloads from one platform to another, physical or virtual or cloud or which cloud, that's usually not a one-way trip, right? Usually when we saw physical to virtual, that was kind of a one-way deal. If you could virtualize something, you did, and there really wasn't a whole lot of consideration unless you screwed it up on moving it from that VM back onto a physical box. That's not the trend that we're seeing here, is it?
No, yeah. And I mean, that's the one thing that you have to kind of be aware of too, right? The data protection strategy that you had on-prem, the data is the data. You need to have
Right.
it protected regardless where it lives.
Yes.
So ideally, you need to have a good overall strategy for how that data gets protected regardless on where it lives. And coming up with something like that, whether that's, BCDR, which is something that I
Yep.
specialize in, something that David is a big fan of, or Jason's a
Preach.
big fan of, right? So we need to have good outcomes for how we protect the data and where that data lives. And there has to be an expectation that at maybe some point in time, that data may not be living where it currently sits, right? Maybe it does get decommissioned, but we have to hold on to 10 years worth of archives. Maybe this data sits as a virtual environment now, but it's now moved over into a multi-cloud vendor of our choosing, but then we decide to roll it back down. I've seen multiple types of strategies from customers that said we're starting with plan A and have now moved down to plan C, plan D, and their data protection strategy had to change, right?
Yep.
Because they didn't plan for multiple migrations or multiple changes like that. They thought once they hit start, they were going to be at the finish line and they would never move again. And then that did not stay valid. So having a strategy that is able to be adoptable across multiple platforms and is able to move when the data moves is what I always tell customers to look at first.
So I love that last nugget, right? So having a strategy that protects it where it is, and then recognizes the fact that you may need to move that onto a different platform of choice. And while I promised to the folks at home I did not queue Emilee up for that one, that idea of, hey, I need to shut it down where it was, a physical data center in Dallas or Phoenix, as an example, and I need to bring it back up someplace else, either that other location or my favorite cloud of choice. On a bad day, we call that disaster recovery, right? On a good day, we just call it cloud flexibility. right? It's like, hey, I need to bring it down because it's too expensive to run over here. I need to bring it up, not because this primary copy went down, but just because I'd rather have it be cheaper. I'd rather it be cloud hosted. I'd rather be more secure running in a cloud
Yeah.
than in my data center. Whatever that scenario is. Hey, so as we're talking about moving data around, let's talk about where folks are and where they've been moving around to as well.
Sure.
So I think it's about time for the map. And okay, I know we're going to do this out of order, but I just always love when Brazil shows up just because such a big chunk of the world turns green all at once. And I do have some friends down there. But taking a look in North and Central America first. Here we go. Great state of Texas showing up as promised. Arizona. We got production coming out of Georgia. We got some folks in Ohio. Jamaica, that beautiful little green island down there. So love seeing y'all come up. So thank you and welcome to the show. Germany, representing all of Europe this morning. If you are in Europe but not in Germany, you got to represent. Let us know where you're coming in from along that way. As I mentioned to my neighbors to the south, always love it when Brazil shows up. Great food, and I hope you'd agree with this one, some great wine comes out of LATAM. So yes, absolutely welcome to the show. Africa, what do we got? So we got another great place for wine. South Africa is representing. If you haven't done the vineyards down in Cape Town, you are missing out. Botswana is also showing up, Mozambique, and I think that's Nigeria on the roster. So welcome to that. And then we also see, is that Jordan and Pakistan is on the show today. So yay. Thank y'all for representing, our whole world on the show as well as at Veeam. It's turned the world green. So thank you for representing. Okay, so let's switch gears. So we've been talking about, in this case, IaaS for the most part, right? So cloud hosted infrastructure. And for a lot of folks, that simply means that lift and shift of moving a workload from one to the other. But for a lot of organizations, simply just taking a VM and taking it from your metal to somebody else's metal, that is not the whole cloud journey, right? For a lot of folks, really, that journey needs to conclude with something like SaaS, right? So we get rid of managing the OS the same way that we got rid of managing the hardware, right? So I'm a fan of SaaS along the way. Certainly the poster child for SaaS is 365. So let's take a second look at, in this case, look at the data from the Data Trends Report again. In this case, the sentiment around protecting Microsoft 365. You know, Emilee, when the first year that this data was published under Veeam's banner, I've been doing this for years prior, but the first year that Veeam published this data, it was like 16%-ish said they were using backup of 365 because, as we all know, Emilee, recycle bin is good enough. And PS, isn't it great that Microsoft backs up all your data for you so that you don't have to worry about that? Please, before someone clips this in a recording, tell me I'm wrong.
You are very wrong. I actually think Microsoft did come out and say, we don't do it. And we're going to recommend that people start doing it, right? And they're even leaning into it. So, yeah, I think to your point, Jason, this isn't surprising. 74% of organizations now back up M365. I mean, we've been preaching about this for the last 4 or 5 years, right? You have to protect your data, regardless on where it lives. It's your responsibility, right? So if you need to be able to recover something, if you had a user that is now, trying to sue the company and they deleted their entire mailbox and it is past those 30 days of the recycle bin, well, guess what? Now you're going to have a lot of lawyers that are going to be very upset with you that you do not have that data handy, right? So there were so many different examples, I think, throughout the years that really kind of, I said, honed in on the fact that it needs to be protected. It needs to have a separate backup, an actual full copy of it that you own and control and can manipulate if you need that data for any point in time. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, what I would say is that this is more of a precursor for M365 is the poster child, but then what about all the other SaaS products that are out there, right? Because that remains the same for those as well. If they don't have a way to back up that data and you don't have access to be able to own and control it, then what do you do when you actually need it and it's no longer there? It is not the responsibility of the SaaS provider, right? It's a shared responsibility model. So
Yeah, in fact, in the blog that came out this morning to highlight some of these same points that Em and I were going to be talking about today, we actually do provide a link to that Microsoft shared responsibility model. But let's take a look at this data from the bottom up, right? So only 4% of folks say, "Hey, Microsoft's already resilient. I don't have to back it up." What that officially means is only 4% of the population is wrong, dead wrong. Um, and they're going to be really surprised when they can't get their stuff back. That is what Dave and I historically have called a resume generating event. So,
Yep.
so that's problem solved number one. Problem number two, only 3% utilize the recycle bin. So basically, only 7% of folks need to go and revisit that Microsoft Shared Responsibility Model document that we talked about earlier and that we posted in this morning's blog. 4%, okay, they don't have a solution, but they know they need one, right? So first step in solving a problem is admitting that you got one. I will say this. So I think it's interesting that even if you just take the percent of folks that are using a third-party backup product or a BaaS service, and I have said on record many times, I'm a huge fan of BaaS. Why wouldn't you use one cloud to protect another cloud? To me, that just makes all the sense in the world. Often you also get managed expertise that goes along with that. So huge fan of BaaS. But whether you're using a self-managed product like Veeam Backup for 365 as an example, or a BaaS service, I'm a huge fan of that. I think it's interesting though, that there's overlap between the folks that are using a third-party backup product and the enhanced tiers. Those enhanced tiers do a lot of things besides backup, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's so many different additional security functionalities that are built
Yep.
into that E5 licensing. I've worked with a lot of the state departments and cities, public sector where legal hold is huge, but then
Oh
also
yeah.
on top of that, the additional security functionality that they get with M365, right? It made a strong case for them to get that E5 licensing versus sticking with an E3. So there's so many other things that are built into that licensing itself that brings additional value on top of just, having legal hold. And again, legal hold isn't a backup. It's still there. It's still
Yeah.
within that M365 tenant. If somebody goes in and removes that legal hold, right? There's still so many ways. It's not that singular additional copy that's completely siloed and fenced off that is your single source of truth. So they go in hand together, but they are not distinctly each other.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many great things that are actually in those E3, E5, and all the other E's and numbers. I mean, I admittedly can't keep all the variations straight, but my point being, there's lots of great functionality that goes there. If you're thinking about legal hold as an alternative to backup, though, I try to describe that to C-levels as would you only snapshot as opposed to a backup, right? So a snapshot is within the same domain. The problem is if that storage array catches on fire, gets flooded, walks away underneath somebody's arm, whatever that is, right? Not only did your current data go, but all those prior snaps go right out the door with it. And so if you think about legal hold in that same kind of domain, that's just one of the fallacies. Should it be like a belt and suspenders? And yes, should you complement your backups with snapshots and replicas? Absolutely. But one does not replace the need for the other along the way. Now, what I do think is interesting is actually not in this data, but it is in some cloud research that we published last year. We did ask in that survey, again, unbiased, but that one was targeting at not only backup admins, but also on SaaS administrators. And we asked SaaS administrators, why do you back up 365? And I got to say, they actually got it right. The number one response as to why they were protecting 365 is because of the threats of ransomware and data deletion along the way. Arson was the problem. It wasn't corruption, just rapid destruction along the way. And compromised credentials is a great way to do that. Number two was regulatory compliance. Right? If you had 7 years of retaining those mails when they were on Exchange server on-prem, you still have 7 years of retention requirements when that data is in a cloud. Those things don't change. And the third one is because it's a better recovery experience than the built-in tools, which always kind of makes me smile just a little bit inside. Okay. So when we talk about the pivots as organizations go on, protecting SaaS makes sense because it's a self-standing workload and the data is the payload, right? That's different from on that last slide we were talking about IaaS, where it's just servers or servers or servers. Help me out with this because to me, PaaS feels more like SaaS than it does IaaS. And what I think, and just as opposed to the jumbled soup, if I just take a Windows server and I move it from physical to or virtual into IaaS, it's still a server, right? It has virtual metal, but it has an OS I have to patch. It has file shares I have to manage, etc. When I move that into platform as a service, and I'm using, say, Azure File Share, which is actually what my stuff is on, Amazon has an alternative for that, or I want to do Amazon RDS or Azure SQL, those kinds of things. To me, that kind of architecture feels more SaaS-y than IaaS-y. Can we talk about how does protection need to change for that?
Yeah, no, and I agree with you, right? I think it kind of makes it a little bit more sticky from a platform perspective, right? Because
Sure.
now you have something, again, least responsibility that you have to go and you have to manage, talking about patching OSs and having
Yep.
to worry about, antivirus security updates, things of that nature. If I move into something that's hosted as a platform, now I don't have to worry too much so about doing all of those other mundane things, right? But there's still the data and you still have to protect that data. So just because you moved from IaaS to platform as a service, there's still a need to have that data secured and still need to have that as a secondary copy. So I would say you still need to treat those very similarly. Now, to your point, there's maybe a little bit more resiliency where maybe the platform as a
Yes.
service, there's not
True.
a larger chance of things to fail, maybe, bad updates, patches, things like that. But the data still the data. You have to protect the data.
When we do the in case you missed it, we might just grab that 4-second clip as the new banner child. We can even put like on the banner of Veeam.com's main page. The data is still the data. You have to protect your data. Let's just and just
Yeah.
replay that clip over and over again is actually where we need to go. All right. We're going to spread that all over the world, just that little 4-second nugget. Speaking around the world though, would love to find out. I don't know if we're quite ready for a map yet or not. So it turns out a lot of folks are piling on, so we don't have the map update yet. So let me switch gears one more time. I want to talk about one of the challenges that we often saw with when folks were first protecting virtual machines, and actually when folks were first looking at protecting or not protecting IaaS, was the admin that was responsible for that new workload didn't always understand the importance of protecting it, right? So, 15 years ago, the virtualization admin, they're like, I just got to get these VMs running. I don't have time to figure out that backup thing. That's somebody else's problem. And what you figured out over time was, no, it's your problem. You need to back up those VMs until IT in general picks it up. Same thing with IaaS, right? So you get cloud folks out there, IaaS admins, who just say, "I'm still trying to get this stuff up without and still have security on it because it's no longer in my brick walls." Eventually, they figure out that you have to back it up. I actually like the idea that SaaS admins are taking a significant amount of ownership in protecting it because if I'm a 365 admin and something goes bad, I am the first person that gets called. I like the idea we built a solution that a 365 admin can run on their own, regardless of what's protecting those, legacy old data center servers. Talk about what your interactions have been like with some of those SaaS owners, like 365 admins, and also let's add SharePoint or Salesforce into that conversation. Do SaaS admins get it? And what does that
Oh, yeah.
conversation look like?
Yeah, I think so because for them, right, before they were the SaaS admin, maybe they were the Exchange admin, they were the SharePoint
All
admin,
right.
right? They
Yep.
had that responsibility to begin with. And, you know, in some cases, right, with some of the customers that I had dealt with previously, that SharePoint admin was the reason that they moved to M365. It was because, hey, we're tired of having to manage all the, you know, all these servers that we need in order to make up our SharePoint farm. So being able to move to a hosted platform means less work of things for me to have to manage, higher availability of the data. But then, of course, right, data protection strategy, where does that lead us? So I see a lot of the application owners really taking ownership of saying, hey, just because we've moved the data, now we need to have a way to protect that. So absolutely. I mean, and we've seen it now with Salesforce too, with those Salesforce administrators saying, yeah, the tools that I have to use in order to get back the data for reports or things of that nature, it's not the best. And I would like to be able to do that a little bit more cleaner and efficiently, so I'm not having to manually do that all myself. And I would say it's probably the same for a lot of different application admins that aren't using third-party backups.
So I love that last example that you gave, especially in the Salesforce domain. I remember when I was first working with Oracle DBAs 30 plus years ago, the main thing, they weren't thinking about data deletion or destruction. They were thinking about, hey, I've added a new schema. I've added a new set of
Yes.
tables. And they had that, oh crap moment when they realized they applied the wrong rule, and all of a sudden working applications no longer worked. Right. So even this that rapid reversion outside of transaction logs was a huge draw for DBAs. And I think folks that are looking at things like Salesforce and whatever we're coming up with next that we haven't quite announced yet, that's going to be some of the same application workloads that they're looking for as well. Hey, I know we're coming short on time, but I want to recognize a few other folks that have joined in for today. So if we can kind of pull the map up really quick, looks like the South in the U.S. is really representing well. We got Colorado representing in. We got California over on the West Coast. Is that North Carolina also chiming in? There's spent a good amount of time out there. Some good people out there. UK is representing, so welcome aboard as well. And then down in Africa, we are making some great progress on the African continent today. So also representing now, we got Kenya in the house. We got Ivory Coast, Ghana. So awesome. Thank you all for piling on. And by the way, I have found Emilee to be a really generous teacher and has a lot of really great insights. So if you do have questions about how's this stuff really lining up with the real world, please put your comments in and we will try to get those answered for you in the hours immediately following. All right, we have one last kind of lens. I want to do this really quick because I want to make sure we end on time. But there was a third data point that comes in. We were talking about when those personas like the vAdmin, the DBA, et cetera, when they may not understand the importance of protecting the data, this is a little bit different. So for now, we're going to be moving from servers to serverless in the framework of more of containers and in fact, our favorite Kubernetes. So the question was, how does your organization protect it? And what we found is that it seems like the persona responsible for some aspect of the containers is often affecting the only aspect of the container that actually gets protected, right? So you can see about 45% of folks, they're only protecting the storage within that container framework, which is kind of like saying, hey, I'm going to snap it. I'm going to snap the LUNs underneath that VMware host, and I don't really need to, reconstitute ESX. I mean, why would you want to know the definitions of those VMs, right? The metadata. Or this one's fun. I like the purple ones who say, I'm just going to protect the database, right? The rest of the app, we can figure it out. But as long as we have the records, we should be fine. Got to give props. Only 3% of folks say we don't have stateful data. And that number used to be a lot larger, but folks have figured out, yes, you really do have stateful data. Yes, it does have to be backed up. Only 1 in 4 are actually using a solution that protects the entire container framework. Does that surprise you?
No. Honestly, if you think about it, how technology has evolved, I think for a lot of people, it depends on the type of roles and responsibilities that it falls under, right? We don't know what we don't know. So maybe those that are backing up the storage only, those are certain administrators that only have access to the storage, right? And those that are backing up the database components are the DBAs that know that that is something that they need to do. And then the ones that are backing up everything, they're the ones that are saying, yep, this is something we have to do. I always like to think of the meme of Spider-Man where all three are kind of just pointing at each other, trying to say, well, whose responsibility is it to capture all of this data? And I could see that eventually changing in the future, right? Where we'll have more of that 25% begin to grow, where everything is being backed up and protected.
Makes sense. Makes sense. All right. So I know we're coming close on time. So a couple quick teasers. So next week, same bat time, same bat channel. I'm a DC guy, not a Marvel person. We're going to be talking about where does the cloud fit in data protection strategy. So this week we talked about production clouds. Next week, we'll be talking about protection clouds along the way. This Thursday, some of our dear friends, our colleagues within the strategy team are going to be talking about Threat Center and deep dive on the Tech Bite show. And then, Em, are you doing anything the first week of June that you want to kind of share with the folks at home? Because
I think we're going to be doing Veeam on, right?
I think we're going to be doing Veeam on.
Veeam on Fort Lauderdale. Yep. So absolutely.
Yeah, so June 3 through 5th. So come hang out with Emilee and I and the rest of the strategy team and a bunch of other Veemers and a couple other 1,000 folks that all know how to spell backup. It ought to be a great time. But so please register on veeamon.com now. Also, if we could just bring up the last slide just for close really quick. If you haven't already downloaded the Veeam Data Protection Trends Report for 2024, we didn't cover today. If you have questions for Dave and I on the research or Em, you can reach out to strategicresearch@veeam.com and get those questions answered if we don't get to them from social media. So with that, I think there's a last minute promo or promotion for Veeam on. We'll roll the credits as always. Em, thank you for joining us today, and for everyone at home, thanks for watching.
Thank you.
Your choice, your partnership, our journey together, Veeam is #1 because we have the #1 community on the planet. We would not exist today, let alone flourish, without these 450,000 plus customers around the world.
Technology and innovation starts with the crowd in this room and the crowd that is online. This is about your business. This is about the market and taking it forward. And we thank you for your partnership in that. We keep your business running.
So you know we go big. Be ready.
Who's ready to get this party started? Thank you for all those that participated in Lab Wars.
Chris Rustin, $10,000.